A mother, a daughter, one man between them. By the end of this story, one of them will be dead. And the police won't believe who pulled the trigger. This is the story of a family that looked perfect from the outside, until a secret buried in text messages tore it apart. Stay till the end, because the real killer isn't who you think. The house on Maple Street looked like something out of a magazine. White shutters, a porch swing that never squeaked, a garden Renata trimmed every Sunday morning, rain or shine, like it was a promise shed made to someone. Neighbors called her the perfect wife, the perfect mother. Renata Hale was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, who brought soup when someone got sick, who smiled so easily it seemed effortless. But smiles can be practiced, and Renata had gotten good at hers at 4 to 6. She had built a life. Most people said they wanted a husband with a steady job, a daughter she loved fiercely, a home with warm lighting and family photos lining the hallway, smiling faces frozen in time, captured on vacations and birthdays, and every ordinary Tuesday that seemed to mean nothing back then. But something in Renata had gone quiet years ago, not loud enough to notice, not sudden enough to name, just a slow fading, like a light dimmed one notch at a time, until no one remembered what full brightness looked like. She stood at the kitchen sink most mornings, watching steam rise from her coffee, staring out at nothing. Her husband Marcus would kiss her cheek on his way out the door, quick, automatic, the kind of kiss you give out of habit, not longing. Love you, see you tonight. He'd say love you too. Shed answer. The words came easily, too easily, like reciting lines from a play shed performed 1,000 times. Renata used to wonder when exactly her marriage became a routine instead of a relationship. She couldn't point to one moment. There was no fight, no betrayal, no dramatic falling out, just years, quiet, comfortable years that hollowed something out of her without her noticing. Until it was already gone, she still loved Marcus. She told herself that every day, but love, she had learned, could exist right alongside loneliness. The two could sit in the same house, share the same bed, and never once collide. What kept her steady was her daughter. Zara had grown into a woman Renata was proud of, sharp, funny, independent. In a way Renata herself had never quite managed to be. Watching Zara build her own life, fall in love, make her own mistakes, and her own victories, it gave Renata something to hold on to. She didn't know yet how much that would cost her. On an ordinary Thursday evening, headlights swept across the driveway. Zara was coming home, and she wasn't alone. Renata wiped her hands on a dish towel, smoothed her hair, and walked toward the front door, ready to meet whoever her daughter had brought home this time. She had no way of knowing that the young man stepping out of that car would unravel everything she had spent 20 years building: her marriage, her family, and eventually her freedom. She just smiled, opened the door, and said hello. Came through the door, first keys jingling in one hand, laughing at something over her shoulder. 24 years old, with her father's stubborn chin and her mother's careful eyes, she had always carried herself like someone who knew exactly where she was going. Mom, this is Caleb, she said, stepping aside. The man who followed her in was tall, maybe late 20s, with an easy smile that seemed to already know how to work a room. He wore a gray jacket, sleeves pushed up, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that either came from money or from practice. Mrs. Hale, Zara talks about you all the time, Caleb said, extending a hand. Good things, I promise. Renata shook it, laughing lightly. Well, that's a relief. His grip lingered half a second too long. She noticed it the way you notice a draft in a room, small, easy to dismiss, gone as quickly as it came. Please call me Renata, she said. They moved into the kitchen, the three of them falling into the easy rhythm families fall into when someone new is being folded into the group. Zara talked about how she and Caleb had met a coffee shop downtown, a spilled latte, an apology that turned into a phone number. Caleb filled in the gaps with jokes, self-deprecating and well-timed, the kind that made Renata laugh despite herself. He's charming, Renata told her daughter later, while Caleb stepped outside to take a call. Where did you find him? I told you, the coffee shop, Zara said, grinning. He's different, Mom. He actually listens, like really listens. Renata smiled and nodded, happy to see her daughter this lit up. It had been a while. When Caleb came back inside, he leaned against the kitchen counter, close enough that Renata caught the scent of his cologne, something dark and expensive. He glanced around the kitchen at the photos on the fridge, the neatly labeled spice rack, the little details that made a house feel lived in. You built a beautiful home, Renata, he said. Thank you, she replied, reaching for the kettle. It's taken a long time. For a moment their eyes met. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but something passed between them in that flicker, something that didn't belong in a kitchen with her daughter standing 3 feet away. Caleb's smile didn't change, his posture didn't shift, but there was a look underneath it, brief and unreadable. On the instant she blinked, Renata turned back to the kettle, her hands suddenly unsteady on the handle. I imagined that, she told herself. He's just being friendly, that's all. She poured the water, focused on the steam curling upward, and pushed the thought away before it could take shape. Dinner passed easily. Laughter filled the kitchen. Marcus came home halfway through and shook Caleb's hand with the same warm indifference he greeted most of Zara's boyfriends with, already reaching for a beer, already changing the subject to something about work. But Renata found herself glancing at Caleb more than she meant to, not out of suspicion. Not yet, just a small quiet pull she couldn't quite explain, and didn't want to look at too closely. That night, long after Zara and Caleb had left, Renata lay awake beside her sleeping husband, staring at the ceiling, replaying a 2-second glance she was almost certain meant nothing at all. By morning, Renata had almost convinced herself the glance meant nothing. She made breakfast, packed her thoughts away like she packed away everything else, and told herself that was the end of it. It wasn't. Caleb started coming around more than she expected, sometimes with Zara, sometimes increasingly without her. The first time it happened, it seemed innocent enough. Zara had texted to say she was running late at work, and could Caleb wait at the house instead of sitting alone at a coffee shop? Renata had said, of course, not thinking twice about it. He showed up with a six-pack of the sparkling water she liked. She didn't remember ever mentioning she liked it. But there it was sitting on the counter like a small deliberate gift. Zara said, "You don't really drink wine," he said, shrugging like it was nothing. Thought it'd bring something else. That's thoughtful, Renata said, surprised. "Thank you." They sat at the kitchen table while they waited for Zara, and the conversation moved easily the way it had that first night. But without Zara there to steer it, the conversation went somewhere different. Caleb asked about Renata, not surface questions, but real ones, what Shed wanted to be before life happened, whether she was happy, whether the quiet in the house ever felt like too much. No one had asked her that in years, not even Marcus. "It's fine," she said automatically. "It's just life." Caleb studied her for a moment like he didn't quite believe her but didn't push that. Became the pattern once a week, sometimes twice. He'd show up early or Zara would run late, and Renata and Caleb would sit at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee cooling between them, talking about things that had nothing to do with Zara at all. She told herself it was harmless. He was young, kind, easy to talk to, nothing more than that. But she began noticing the way she looked forward to those afternoons, the way she changed out of her sweatpants before he arrived, the way she laughed a little louder at his jokes. Then she needed to. "He's my daughter's boyfriend," she reminded herself again. And again, like a rule, she was terrified of breaking. One afternoon, as he stood to leave, he touched her shoulder, barely, just a brush of fingers. As he passed behind her chair, "Thanks for listening, Renata," he said quietly. "You're easy to talk to." The words settled somewhere in her chest. She didn't want to examine after he left. She stood in the bathroom, gripping the edge of the sink, staring at her own reflection. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes looked brighter than they had in months. She hated how alive she felt. "You're being ridiculous," she whispered to the mirror. "He's 26. He's Zara's boyfriend. Get a grip." But the reflection staring back at her didn't look convinced. It looked like a woman who had spent 20 years disappearing quietly into a life that no longer asked anything of her, and had just been reminded in the smallest possible way what it felt like to be seen. She turned off the bathroom light before she had to look any longer that night. She deleted his last text message before Marcus could glance at her phone over dinner. It was nothing, she told herself, just a joke about coffee, nothing worth explaining. But she deleted it anyway, and somewhere underneath the guilt, quiet and unwelcome, was a feeling she hadn't let herself name, yet one that was about to get a lot harder to ignore. It happened on a Tuesday. Renata would remember that detail forever, the way people remember small, meaningless facts about the moments that ruin them. The day of the week, the song playing quietly on the radio, the smell of rain that hadn't quite started falling, yet Zara had gone out of town for a work conference 3 days, maybe 4. Shed mentioned it casually over dinner the week before, and Renata hadn't thought much of it until Caleb texted her Tuesday afternoon asking if he could stop by. Zara had left some things at the house. He said nothing that couldn't wait, but he was in the area anyway. She should have said no later. She would replay that moment 100 times, searching for the version of herself that said no. Instead, she said, "Sure, it'll be here." He arrived just after 4, the house empty. Except for the 2 of them, Marcus still hours from home. They sat in the kitchen like they always did, coffee going cold between them, conversation drifting the way it always drifted, easy, unhurried, dangerously comfortable. But that day the silences lasted longer, the glances held a beat too long. When Caleb reached across the table to take his mug, his hand brushed hers, and neither of them pulled away as quickly as they should have. "Renata," he said quietly, "I think about you more than I should." The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back once spoken. "Caleb, don't," she said, though her voice lacked the conviction the words needed. "This isn't, we can't." "I know," he said, "I know exactly what this is. I've told myself the same thing every day for weeks." "Then why are you here?" He looked at her, and for once the charm was gone from his face, replaced by something rawer, something that looked almost like fear. "Because I couldn't stay away anymore." What happened next, Renata would never fully explain to herself, let alone to anyone else. There was no dramatic collapse of willpower, no single decision she could point to, just a slow, terrible surrender. 2 people who knew exactly how wrong this was choosing it anyway. Afterward, she sat wrapped in silence at the edge of her bed, staring at the wall, feeling the weight of what she'd done settle into her chest like stone. Shame arrived first, sharp and immediate. Underneath it, quieter and far more dangerous, was something else, a feeling of being wanted, truly wanted in a way she hadn't felt in years. She hated herself for how good it felt. "This can't happen again," she said, not looking at him. Caleb sat beside her, pulling his shirt back on, quiet for a long moment before he spoke. "Renata, I need you to hear me," he said. "This isn't just about Zara anymore. It stopped being about her a while ago for me. Don't say that it's true. I didn't plan this, but I'm not sorry it happened." She turned to look at him, searching his face for some sign that he understood the destruction sitting right in front of them. A daughter, a husband, a family built over 20 years. But all she saw was certainty, calm and unshaken, like he had already made peace with a decision she hadn't even let herself consider. "Yet you need to go," she whispered, "before Zara gets back, before Marcus gets home." He nodded, gathering his jacket, but paused at the bedroom door. "I am not going anywhere, Renata," he said softly. "Not really." The door clicked shut behind him. Renata sat alone in the fading afternoon light, listening to his car pull out of the driveway, and felt something inside her split cleanly in two. The woman she had been that morning, and the woman she had become in the hours since. She didn't yet know how far this would go, but some part of her, quiet and terrified, already suspected there was no walking it back. Marcus Hale had always been a man of routines. Up at 6, coffee black, no sugar, gym twice week, though lately it had slipped to once, home by 7 most nights later if a deadline was chasing him, which lately felt like always. He was not a cruel man, not careless exactly, just distracted in the way men become when they stop noticing the people standing closest to them, not because they don't love them, but because love had quietly become background noise. Something assumed rather than tended to. He came home that Tuesday evening at 7:30. Tie loosened briefcase, dropped by the door out of 18 years of habit. Renata was at the stove stirring something she couldn't remember, starting, her hands moving on autopilot. While her mind replayed a bedroom, a closed door, a voice saying, "This isn't just about Zara anymore. Smells good, Marcus," said, kissing the top of her head. "Long day. Client pushed the deadline up again. That's frustrating," she said, and was almost surprised by how normal her voice sounded. They sat down to dinner the way they had 1,000 times before, Marcus talking about a coworker's incompetence, Renata nodding at the right moments, the television murmuring low in the other room. It was by every outward measure an ordinary evening under the table. Renata's hands would not stop shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs, willing them still. Terrified Marcus would notice. Terrified he wouldn't. Both possibilities felt unbearable in different ways. "You okay?" Marcus asked, glancing up from his plate. "You're quiet tonight. Just tired," she said. "Long day too." He nodded, already reaching for them. Already half gone into whatever thought came next. He didn't ask what had made the day long. He didn't notice the way her fork trembled against the plate, or how she flinched slightly when his hand found hers across the table. This was the man she had built a life with, steady, reliable, kind, in his own quiet, undemonstrative way. He had never given her a reason to doubt him, never raised his voice in 20 years of marriage, never made her feel small, and still she had spent that afternoon in another man's arms. That was the part she couldn't explain to herself, not the guilt, which made perfect sense, but the strange, hollow grief underneath it. She wasn't just betraying Marcus. She was betraying the version of herself who had once believed she was better than this. "I might turn in early," she said, standing to clear the plates. Marcus caught her wrist gently as she passed, and for one terrifying second she thought he knew. "Hey," he said softly, "everything all right between us?" Her breath caught. "Why would you ask that? I don't know. You've seemed far away lately." She forced a smile, the same practiced smile she had perfected over the years. "I'm right here." Marcus just tired. He let go of her wrist, satisfied, already reaching for the television remote again. She carried the dishes to the sink and stood there for a long moment, listening to the water run, watching her own trembling hands disappear beneath the suds. Marcus had no idea what was coming, and somewhere across town, in a small apartment with the lights still on, Caleb was already typing message on his phone, one that would arrive on Renata's screen just as she climbed into bed beside her unsuspecting husband. Zara got back from her work trip on a Friday, tired and jet-lagged, dragging her suitcase through the front door with the particular exhaustion of someone who'd spent 4 days in windowless conference rooms. Caleb picked her up from the airport, kissed her like nothing in the world had changed, and told her he'd missed her. She believed him. Why wouldn't she? It was small things at first, the kind of things that don't mean anything on their own, but start to add up if you're paying attention, and Zara, without quite realizing it, had started paying attention. The first was his phone. Caleb had never been protective of it before. He left it face up on tables, let her scroll through his playlist, never flinched when a text lit up the screen mid-conversation. But that Friday night, when she reached for it to check the time, he moved it quick, almost reflexive, sliding it into his jacket pocket before she could touch it. "Since when do you lock your phone?" she asked, half joking. "I don't," he said, "just habit, work stuff." She let it go. It wasn't worth an argument over nothing. The second thing was harder to explain even to herself. It was her mother. Renata had always liked Caleb. That wasn't new, but lately her interest felt different, sharper somehow. She asked about him constantly, how things were going, whether he seemed happy, whether Zara thought this one might last. "You've never asked this much about a boyfriend before," Zara said one evening, only half paying attention. As she scrolled through her phone, Renata's hands paused over the dishes for just a second too long. "Can't a mother take an interest?" "Sure, it's just weird, that's all." "Weird how?" Zara shrugged, unable to name it. "I don't know, you seem invested. It's kind of nice, actually." Renata forced a laugh and turned back to the sink, and Zara thought nothing more of it, not that night anyway. But small things kept accumulating the way they do, quietly building weight until they can no longer be ignored. Caleb canceling plans at the last minute, vague about where he'd been. A missed call from her mother's number on his phone late one night that he swore was a butt deal, the way he sometimes looked at Renata across a room a beat too long, then caught himself and looked away. None of it was proof of anything. Zara told herself that constantly, the way people do when some instinctive part of them already senses the truth before their mind is ready to accept it. She tried to shake the feeling, told herself she was being paranoid, that 4 days away had made her insecure, that Caleb loved her and her mother was just being kind. But one night, lying beside him in the dark, she found herself staring at the ceiling, replaying every small moment like pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to finish assembling. "You've been quiet," Caleb murmured beside her, half asleep. "Just thinking," she said, about what. She hesitated, the question sitting heavy in her throat. "Nothing, never mind." He fell asleep within minutes, his breathing slow and even beside her. Zara lay awake much longer, staring into the dark, a cold unease settling into her chest that she couldn't quite name yet, but that she knew somewhere deep down wasn't going away on its own. The next morning, while Caleb was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Zara glanced at it without meaning to. For the first time, she saw a name on the screen that made her entire body go still. The name on the screen was Mom. For one dizzy second, Zara's brain tried to make it make sense. Maybe it was a mistake, maybe she'd misread it, maybe Caleb had some contacts saved as a joke, some leftover label from an old phone he hadn't bothered to fix. But the shower was still running down the hall, and the phone was still buzzing gently against the nightstand. And the name sitting there in plain black letters was not a joke. It was saved exactly the way her own contact for Renata was saved. Mom. Her hand moved before her mind caught up with it. She told herself she was just checking That shed close at the second she saw nothing, laugh at herself for being paranoid, put the phone back exactly where it had been. The screen was locked. But the message preview was enough. Can't stop thinking about yesterday. We need to be more careful. Delete this. Zara read it 3 times. Each time, the words rearranged themselves into something worse than the last. Her chest tightened a slow crushing pressure that made it hard to breathe evenly. This wasn't a butt deal. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a message that had clearly been sent before and clearly answered in a conversation that stretched back further than one careless text. The shower shut off down the hall. Zara set the phone down exactly where Shed found it, angled the same way, screen dimming back to black, and sat frozen on the edge of the bed, her mind racing through weeks of small moments that suddenly slotted into place with sickening clarity. The locked phone, her mother's strange sudden interest, the missed call late at night that he'd sworn was nothing. It had never been nothing. Caleb walked back into the room a few minutes later, towel around his waist, hair still damp, smiling like the world hadn't just tilted sideways. "You're up early." He said. "Couldn't sleep?" Zara said. Her voice came out steadier. Then she felt. "You okay? You look pale." "I'm fine." He didn't push. He never pushed, she realized now. He simply moved past whatever might slow him down, redirected, smoothed things over with a joke or a kiss or a change of subject. She had always found that easy about him. Now it felt like something else entirely, something practiced. She watched him get dressed, laughing at something on his phone, utterly unaware that the woman across the room had just seen the first crack in a lie big enough to destroy her entire family. She thought about confronting him right then. The words sat right at the edge of her throat, sharp and furious, ready to spill out. "Who is this? What is this? Tell me the truth." But something stopped her, a small, cold voice that told her she needed more than a text message preview to be sure. She needed proof. She couldn't unsee proof strong enough that no explanation, no charm, no easy smile could talk his way out of. So instead, she smiled back at him, forced and thin, and said she needed to shower too. She locked the bathroom door behind her, turned the water on to cover the sound, and sat down on the closed toilet lid, pressing both hands over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Her mother's name, her boyfriend's phone, a message that should never have existed. Zara stared at her own reflection, the mirror, hollowed and shaking, and made a decision. She was going to find out exactly how far this went, even if it destroyed everything she thought she knew. Zara spent 3 days gathering proof before she said a word to anyone. It wasn't hard. Once she knew where to look, a second phone number. Caleb thought she didn't know about a calendar app with appointments labeled in vague, meaningless words, meeting, errand, coffee, that always seemed to line up with afternoons. Her mother was conveniently alone. A photo finally buried in a cloud backup. He'd forgotten to check her mother's hand, her mother's kitchen table, a moment neither of them had meant to preserve. By Sunday, she had enough. She invited them both to the house under the pretense of a family dinner. Told her mother she wanted to talk about something important. Told Caleb the same. Marcus was away for the weekend, a work trip that had for once worked in her favor. They sat at the same kitchen table where it had all started. Renata poured wine with hands that trembled slightly. Caleb smiled, easy as ever, completely unaware of the storm sitting across from him. "So," Zara said, setting her phone face up on the table between them, "I wanted to talk about this." The photo filled the screen. The room went silent in a way that felt physical, like the air itself had been knocked out of it. Renata's face drained of color. Caleb's easy smile flickered, then collapsed entirely. "Zara," Renata started. "Don't," Zara said, her voice shaking but sharp. "Don't you dare say my name like that, like you're about to comfort me, like this is something you can explain your way out of." "It's not what it looks like," Caleb said quickly. Zara let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "It's exactly what it looks like. I've seen the texts, I've seen the photo, I've seen the calendar full of lies. So don't insult me by pretending I don't already know." Caleb glanced at Renata, some silent question passing between them, and that single glance told Zara more than any confession could have. "How long?" Zara asked, looking at her mother. "Now, how long has this been going on?" Renata's hands were shaking so badly the wine glass trembled against the table. "Zara, please let me explain." "How long?" "Months," Renata whispered. The word landed like a physical blow. Zara sat back in her chair, staring at the two people she had trusted most in the world, feeling something inside her chest crack cleanly in half. "You're my mother," she said, her voice breaking. "He's my boyfriend. Do you understand what you've done? Do you have any idea? I never meant for this to happen," Renata said, tears sliding down her face. "Now I know that doesn't make it better. I know nothing I say makes this better. But I never meant to hurt you. You slept with my boyfriend for months. And you're telling me you didn't mean to hurt me?" Zara's voice cracked into something raw and furious. "What did you think would happen? That I'd never find out? That I'd just keep dating him? While you, Zara, I love you," Renata said desperately. "You're my daughter. Nothing changes that." "Don't," Zara snapped. "Don't you dare say you love me right now." Caleb finally spoke, his voice quieter than Zara had ever heard it. "I never meant to fall for her, Zara. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Get out." Zara said, her voice suddenly terrifyingly calm. "Both of you get out of this house." "Zara, please." Renata reached for her hand across the table. Zara pulled away like she'd been burned. "Don't touch me. Don't call me. Don't come near me. I don't know who either of you are anymore." Caleb stood first, grabbing his jacket, refusing to meet Zara's eyes. As he moved toward the door, Renata lingered a moment longer, tears streaming freely now, searching her daughter's face for some flicker of forgiveness that wasn't there. "I am so sorry," Renata whispered. "Get out," Zara repeated, her voice hollow, "and don't come back until you figure out how to tell my father the truth, because I won't be the one to do it for you." The door clicked shut behind them, and Zara sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the 2 empty wine glasses, feeling the full weight of her family's distraught settle over her like something she would never fully climb out from under. She had no idea it was about to get so much worse. 3 weeks passed in silence. Zara didn't speak to her mother. Renata moved into a rented apartment across town, unable to face the house on Maple Street, unable to face Marcus, who still didn't know not yet why his wife had suddenly wordlessly packed a bag and left. He found out on a Tuesday, the same day of the week everything else had started. Zara hadn't meant to tell him. Shed promised herself she wouldn't, that it wasn't her place, that her mother owed him that truth herself, but grief has a way of breaking promises. And one night, sitting across from her father at a diner, neither of them wanted to be at. The whole story came pouring out of her: the text, the photo, the confrontation, all of it. Marcus sat very still while she talked. He didn't interrupt, he didn't ask questions. When she finished, he simply nodded once, paid the bill, and drove home without saying a word. Zara didn't know until much later where he went after that. The house on Maple Street was dark when Caleb's car pulled into the driveway that night. His own idea, not Renata's. He told her he wanted to talk to figure out what came next. Now that the truth was out, Shed hesitated, then agreed to meet him there one last time in the house that had started everything. She didn't know Marcus was already inside. He'd been sitting in the dark kitchen for almost an hour, by then a glass of untouched whiskey sweating on the counter in front of him, his mind looping the same sentence over and over. 20 years, 20 years. And this was how it ended when the front door opened and Caleb's voice called out Renata. Marcus didn't move. He let the silence answer for him. Caleb stepped into the kitchen and stopped short at the sight of him. Marcus, he said carefully. I didn't expect. Sit down, Marcus said. His voice was flat, terrifyingly calm. Caleb didn't sit. Look, I know this is a lot, but I think we should all talk, the three of us, when Renata gets here. I don't want to talk to my wife, Marcus said, standing now slow and deliberate. I want to talk to you what happened over the next several minutes. No one would ever fully reconstruct, not the detectives, not the neighbors, not even Marcus himself. In the fractured, disbelieving hours that followed, voices rose. A chair scraped hard against the floor. Something shattered, a glass or a bottle. No one could say which. There was shouting. There was a shove that turned into something worse. And somewhere in the blur of rage that had been building silently for 3 weeks, for 20 years if he was honest, Marcus reached for the heavy cast iron pan still sitting on the stove from a dinner Renata had never finished cooking. The kitchen, the same kitchen where Renata and Caleb had first crossed a line neither of them could take back, became something else entirely. Afterward, the silence was absolute. Marcus stood over what he'd done, breathing hard, the pan still gripped in one shaking hand, staring down at the man who had unraveled his marriage and now would never leave this house at all. Blood pooled slowly across the tile, dark and spreading, catching the dim light from the hallway. On the counter, Caleb's phone lit up once, buzzing softly against the granite. Renata, I'm outside. Are you okay in there? The screen glowed for a moment longer, casting pale light across the wreckage of the room. Then it dimmed, and the kitchen fell silent. The phone buzzed once on the kitchen counter, then went silent forever. Renata's screams brought the neighbors running before the police ever arrived. She had let herself into the house minutes after her last message went unanswered, expecting silence, expecting maybe an argument already cooling into an awkward standoff. What she found instead sent her stumbling back out onto the porch, phone shaking in her hand. As she dialed 911, her voice barely coherent through the sobs. By the time the first patrol car arrived, red and blue lights washing silently over the white shutters of the house on Maple Street, Renata was sitting on the front steps, knees pulled to her chest, blood on her hands from checking for a pulse that was never going to come back. Detective Iniacutes Cordero arrived 20 minutes later. She was a compact woman in her early 50s, gray threading through dark hair pulled back in a tight knot, wearing the kind of expression that had seen enough crime scenes to stop reacting to them out loud. She moved through the house with quiet efficiency, absorbing details the way other people absorbed noise. Automatically, constantly, without effort. The body, the pan discarded near the sink, still faintly stained. The overturned chair. A woman on the porch who couldn't stop shaking. Talk to me, Cordero said to the responding officer. Victims: Caleb Ray's 26 girlfriend's mother found him, says she'd been having an affair with him. Daughter found out a few weeks back. Whole thing blew up the family. Cordero's eyebrows lifted slightly. Motive had just introduced itself before Shed even asked. She found Renata still on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket someone had produced from somewhere, staring blankly at nothing. Mrs. Hill, Cordero said, gently crouching to her level. I know this is difficult. I need you to walk me through tonight. Renata's account came out in broken, disjointed pieces. The affair, the confrontation weeks earlier, Caleb texting her that night asking to meet at the house to talk things through, her arriving to find the door unlocked, the house dark. And then I couldn't breathe, Renata whispered. I just found him like that. Where was your husband tonight? Renata's face went still. I don't know, he's been staying somewhere else. Since everything came out, Cordero made a note, small, unremarkable, the kind of detail that meant nothing yet. And everything later. Over the following days, the investigation moved with careful precision. Cordero interviewed Zara, who confirmed the affair, confirmed the confrontation, confirmed that her mother had every reason in the world to want Caleb gone from their lives. She interviewed neighbors who described raised voices from the house on more than one recent evening, though none could say for certain which night, or whose voices exactly. The obvious answer sat right there waiting to be accepted. A scorned lover, a woman caught between an affair and its unraveling, a man who knew too much and threatened to destroy what was left of her family. Renata was brought in for formal questioning within the week, but Cordero had built a career on the details other people rushed past, and something about this case refused to sit flat. The timeline didn't quite fit. Renata's phone records placed her outside the house, not inside, at the estimated time of death. The blunt force pattern on the body suggested significant physical strength, More than the delicate bruising on Renata's own hands from finding him could account for, and then there was the husband, Marcus Hale, who had an alibi that felt rehearsed the first time she heard it, and rehearsed again the second Cordero sat in her car outside the house on Maple Street staring at the darkened windows. Flipping back through her notes, something about this family's story was still missing, and she intended to find out exactly what it was. The break came from a security camera 2 houses down, the kind of camera nobody remembers exists until it becomes the only thing that matters. It hadn't caught much, a grainy angle of the street half obscured by a hedge, but it caught enough. Marcus Hale's car parked a block from the house on Maple Street, arriving nearly an hour before Renata's own car pulled into the driveway that night. Cordero watched the footage 3 times before she picked up her phone. She brought Marcus in the next morning, calm and procedural, the way she brought in every suspect who didn't yet know how much she already had. He sat across from her in the small interview room, hands folded, his rehearsed alibi ready on his tongue before Shed even asked the first question. I was at a hotel that night, he said. I told you already, I hadn't been staying at the house. We have a hotel key card that was never used to enter a room. Cordero said evenly. We have your car a block from Maple Street an hour before your wife arrived. And we have a pan, Mr. Hale, that we're still waiting on lab results for, results that will match whoever held it. Marcus' composed expression cracked just slightly at the corner of his mouth. I want to talk to a lawyer, he said quietly, but something in him had already started to give way, the same slow unraveling that had been building since the night Zara told him the truth in that diner. He held it together for weeks, rehearsed his alibi in the mirror, convinced himself he could carry the weight of what he'd done in silence forever. He couldn't. 2 days later, with his lawyer beside him, Marcus confessed he told Cordero about the whiskey, the dark kitchen, the hour he'd spent waiting for anyone to walk through that door, and explain how 20 years of marriage had ended up here. He told her about Caleb's voice calling out for Renata, about the rage that had been sitting quiet and patient inside him for 3 weeks, finally finding somewhere to go. I didn't plan it, he said, his voice breaking. I just wanted him to feel 1% of what I felt. And then I couldn't stop. The arrest made headlines across the city. Betrayed husband charged in murder of wife's lover. Neighbors who had once called the Hale family the picture of suburban happiness now stood on their lawns watching news vans line Maple Street, whispering about signs they swore in hindsight they should have seen. Renata sat the trial in a courtroom that felt colder every day, watching the man Shed married unravel completely under the weight of what he'd done, what her own choices had set into motion. She wasn't charged. She hadn't pulled the pan from the stove, hadn't swung it, hadn't stood over Caleb's body while his phone buzzed uselessly on the counter. But she carried a different kind of sentence, one with no release date. Zara didn't attend most of the trial. She couldn't sit in that room and watch her father's sent murder. Her mother's affair had set in motion. Couldn't look at either of them without seeing the wreckage of the family Shed once believed was simply ordinarily happy. Marcus was sentenced to 22 years. Renata moved out of the city, entirely unable to walk past the house on Maple Street without seeing the kitchen exactly as Shed found it that night. She and Zara spoke rarely, a birthday call, a holiday text, the fragile beginnings of something that might someday resemble forgiveness, or might not. The house on Maple Street sold within the year. The white shutters repainted, the garden replanted by strangers who had no idea what had happened inside those walls. New families move in unaware that beneath the fresh paint and the quiet cul-de-sac charm, an entire family had once broken apart in that kitchen quietly. And then all at once, some houses keep their secrets long after the people who made them are gone. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow the channel. There are so many more true crime stories waiting to be told.